sort of film. Well, it's an audio by Brenda, obviously Maureen's sister, and I did some images that go with it, and here it is. It only lasts 5 minutes. I'll get it started and put this on mute for a bit.
Oh yes.
Right.
That's
Okay.
me. That's me in the stripy jumper to the right, middle row.
This one here.
That one, yes, that's me.
Wow. Wow.
Oh, that's lovely, Maureen.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start it now. So quiet, everybody.
When I remember my Hulme, my heart wants to sing. Shaped the person I am, gave me so many things. I'll just close my eyes and transport myself back. I never moved really. I could never do that. Children out playing till the street lights came on, joking and laughing until the laughter was done. Those streets were our playground, didn't need out else. We were rich in our friendships. It was never about self. Then diggers came. Why? They tore you down, destroyed in one fell swoop. What they didn't destroy, they couldn't remove. My heart, my soul, my roots. When I lived in Hulme, I lived in a bubble, like most of our community. Anywhere outside of Hulme didn't exist. The farthest I ever ventured outside this bubble was to Manchester town centre with my gran on a Saturday afternoon, to Thornton's sweet shop in Piccadilly for their famous special creamy toffee served in a small white greaseproof paper bag, and then through to Piccadilly Gardens to Lewis's to ride on the moving escalator. Such a treat. Then, in my teens, I met and married a soldier. We were posted to Germany. I cried for a month. It was on another planet, another language. I wanted to come home to Hulme. After being in Germany for about 6 months, my mother wrote to tell me that she and the rest of the family had moved to Chorlton. She had to let me know because we'd be staying with her when we came home on leave. She wrote her new address, but no explanation. This doesn't surprise me, as she was never one for saying anything she felt you didn't need to know. When we arrived at the new address, all I wanted to do was get on the 81 bus to take me into Hulme to see my best mate Jackie and the rest of Hulme. I was so homesick. Not used to standing on ceremony in our house, I threw my suitcase into the lobby and shouted over my shoulder to anyone who may have been interested, "See you later, won't be long." I jumped onto the 81 bus and asked the driver for a ticket to the corner of Jackson Street and Stretford Road. "Are you sure?" he said. "Yes," I replied. "Oh, if you're sure." When I reached the stop, there were no words. Gone. Everything. Gone. Everybody gone. I must have stood rooted to that spot for over an hour, because physically I could not move. I felt like a ghost, lost, unable to move, but wanting to stay. Somehow I managed to get back to my mother's address in order to find an explanation for this nightmare. She just shrugged her shoulders. This woman, a few words that hadn't changed. It took me over 50 years to find my best mate Jackie on Facebook. For many years after, in my mind, I was still there, stood on that corner, numb. Before we went back to Germany, I did go back to that corner and got off at that same stop to witness all that demolition. As I stood there that second time, I closed my eyes and tried to imagine it all still there. When I began to feel an energy, as though it was rising up from the ground. I breathed in this air, this energy. I could feel the soul of Hulme was still there. It still is to this day, because the people are back. Not long ago, I joined with a group of like-minded people in a torchlit midnight walk around what is now known as the Red Bricks, but for us, oldies of Hulme. We knew them as Jackson Street Flats. During this walk I met a lovely lady who I shared my story with, and how I still felt as though I had nowhere I could call home after all these years. This lady looked into my eyes smiling, put a hand on my shoulder and said to me the 3 most beautiful words I'd ever heard. And that finally gave me peace. She said, "Welcome home, Brenda."
Did you?
That was lovely. That was really good.
I liked it.
You're wearing that top, weren't you, Maureen, in that photo?
Oh, was I? Oh, right, okay. Actually, I spent the day at Brenda's and I'd only got a cardie in the back of the car, so I wasn't expecting to be out at, 7, 8 o'clock at night outside the Hulme Hippodrome again. So, yes, that was amazing.
Right. Well, that one's on a separate YouTube as well, so you can see it. I'll give you all the references to these things later on. But I'll start. That was fantastic, and thanks to Brenda for that.
Really lovely, really moving.
I thought it was just
And interesting.
interesting and moving, right? And what it indicates, I think, is, and I'm going to share again. Well, I'm sharing this because.
Yeah.
This is a talk about it, really.
Yeah.
And it's about how Hulme, more than any other place that I've studied, seems to have people with very, very deep, strong memories about it. But maybe that's just because I've talked with more people who've come from around there. And these are some of the comments that were in a little video that was done called The Spirit of Hulme that Brenda was in. I think you were in it as well, Maureen. And these are some of the quotes. Hulme is about people. The crescents could look like a smile, but sometimes a frown. That was the Hulme 2, the second version of Hulme with the crescents, which from the air do look like a smile or a frown, depending which way you look at them. As children, we roamed free. Hulme is humanity. I'll always be Hulme. It's my spiritual home. A rich, diverse and amazing history, but bittersweet memories. Hulme is the best of Manchester. And that I think is fairly typical of it. And what I'm going to use is Brenda's story, but also Doreen, who's a friend of mine who was brought up in Hulme as well, and who gave me a load of old photos. And this is Doreen on the left, age I think she was age 6 then, and she lived on Hardman Street, and I think it was called Hardman Street initially.
Street. Oh, yeah. I know it.
Then it became Hardwick Street. It was a different one. And you can see from that one that she's in the same street her Auntie Flo lived, her family lived, there were relatives all around. It was eventually demolished in 1963 when she moved to Wythenshawe, age 14, with a mum, dad and an elder sister. And that's the picture of Brenda in the early years. Gosh, she was a very good looking lady, wasn't she? She still is, of course.
So is Brenda.
And here's a picture of Doreen, and Doreen with her sister Ada, who was 11 years older than she was. And you can see from that street, you can see at the end of it, the City Road School in the background, which Ada went to.
Oh, yeah.
And on the other end, taken from the other side, is her with her sister, with St. Wilfrid's School in the background. And notice nobody had cars then.
No.
No cars on the streets.
No cars. No.
I thought that was
Affordable.
it's interesting that St. Wilfrid's Church, which goes with the school, is the only Pugin church in Manchester, and the famous architect. Anyway, this is another photo of Doreen with her sister. And one thing to notice is the coat. Do you know what sort of collar that is? It's an Astrakhan collar. Now, Astrakhan is a rare lamb's wool from a particular breed of Russian sheep or Russian lambs. And the reason that she's got such a tailored suit on is that her uncle, who is called Robert Lutas, he was a gambler and often got into debt. So Ada sometimes gave him some money to help pay off the debts, and in return, he made Doreen that coat with an Astrakhan collar. which is really quite remarkable. But again, it shows the kind of story of because houses were passed on from family to family and family to friends based on the people who were collecting the rent, which I suppose in the past would have included L.S. Lowry amongst others. And this is just a map of Hulme and Moss Side, and it was taken in 1956 Ordnance Survey. And it's not to look at any one thing in particular, but it's just the sheer crowdedness of the streets. Gives you an impression of how crowded together everything was. And there were not very many green spaces either. You can see Whitworth Park on the right, and to the south, of course, was Alexandra Park. Here's another one which is closer, which shows with that blue arrow where Doreen was brought up on the top, and you can see with St. Wilfrid's at the bottom. And of course they were all wiped out. And here you get the overall feeling that it was very, very close to the centre. With if you take this as Hulme, it goes right up to the locks, right up to the canal, and then eventually it was sliced off by Princess Road when it became sort of semi-motorway. Now, what I want to give is some impression of the sheer amount of cultural variety that was going on at that time. And this was Doreen's in St. Stephen's, her dancing class. And in that class, she was taught by the guy at the back who looks a bit like Lurch from. He was the husband of the teacher, Mrs. Bradshaw, on the left, and he had a wooden leg, so he wasn't a dancer himself particularly, but she taught this group. And can you tell from that photograph what Christmas production they were putting on? Have a look at the top left. It's I think that's I can't remember what it's called now. That's a chicken at the top left, isn't it? So it was some sort of thing to do with that. I seem to have lost the reference to it.
Mother Goose. No.
Pardon?
Mother Goose.
Yes, that's what it was. Mother Goose. There you see. There's a goose. But they were also quite complex things. They all had the dresses. It was, and occasionally, if they needed boys, they get one from the choir that was held there and drag them in to play one or two of the parts. Because there's another great.
Oh, I remember them days.
And I think where's Doreen on that? Oh, Doreen is yes, you're right. It's the girl at the bottom right. That's Doreen.
Oh.
And you can see with the backcloth the effort that they made to make it realistic. There again, they're there. And where's Doreen on that one? Maybe I've hidden her a bit. You think which one is it? Oh, sorry, I got a bit sidetracked there. Previous. Yes, I think she is down there, isn't she? Anyway, but you can see it was quite a production with some older members of the cast too. And there were an awful lot of these groups around, and there's Lurch in the background here. So that was one of the sort of things that are going on. The other thing to remember, which I talked about last week with Alexandra Road in Moss Side and Whalley Range, was the sheer variety of the shopping areas that were available. There was this was City Road, which was one of the major roads, and there were also others with Stretford Road, where there were lots and lots of different shops, and of course lots of pubs. There is actually a book on the history of Hulme pubs, which I think counted over 50 pubs in the area.
Yeah,
a lot of pubs then there were.
They were incredibly popular. This was the early 1900s, which is very early on. This is much later on. This is Cavendish Street, another shopping area with a
baby
Hesketh Men's Outfitters that's on Stretford Road.
Wow.
And that, I think, is a very typical shop with Woolworths on the right-hand side, and the bus coming from Wythenshawe, the 102, coming through onto Stretford Road. Mm-hmm. There you can see another Hesketh's for men's suits, Pramland, household stores. lots and lots of those household stores were terrific. They had sort of everything in them.
Anything you could get there.
Yeah. And this is looking towards where the university is now. There was that was the church, and that I think there is where Paulding's was.
Remember Paulding's, yeah.
Which was damaged by a fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bernard.
Yes.
Bernard. Yeah. I actually was the Rose Queen at that church, Cavendish Congregational Church, and not long after they cleared the whole area. So I never retired. I'm still the Rose Queen of Cavendish Congregational.
Well done.
Yeah.
Claim to fame.
That old building at the back there is where the art school is now at the moment. I think.
Yes, that building's still there.
Yeah, yeah. But Paulding's was burnt down, and I remember it was like a bombed out site, and then a bus actually ran into it and into the dip, and several people were injured, including a friend of my mother's who came to visit us, who always wore braces and a caliper after that.
Oh dear.
Now, the other sort of things that were going on was an awful lot of cinemas. So that gives you some insight to the sort of cinemas that were going on there.
I'm like 17.
I mean, you know, there's really quite a variety of films if you look at it. And so you've got Hulme on the left there with 4 cinemas. Just for interest, and Chorlton only seemed to have 2, the Gaumont and the Palace, one of which became the Isolde eventually, with the White Witch Doctor. They obviously wanted a bigger advert, so they put it 3 times.
Yes.
So people would notice it. But you can see, I don't know if you remember the Manchester Evening News. It used to have a page of all the suburban cinemas in it. And it used to take up a page and a half of the large evening news. And then it gradually went down and went down and went down until it was just like half a paragraph as they all closed. So these were the ones in Hulme, the York, the Pop, the Popular Picture Palace, the Crescent, the Luxor, which became a club, and then the only one that's I know that's still standing, which is the Imperial, which was at Brooks Bar, which was just on the edge.
Yeah.
Of,
That used to be my cinema, that.
yeah, I remember going to that one as well. And next door to it became a Union HQ, which is where Yuri Gagarin stopped off to talk to the trade unionists in it. And someone I know was there and was working as a typist there, and she met him too. But
Now a health centre now.
yeah, it's for wood. They've got wood, haven't they? It's a wood store and things like that.
Oh, it was. It used to be a health centre.
Yeah. But that's the recreation, and of course there was the Hulme Hippodrome, where you get Jackie Clitheroe was a star there. Nat Jackley, who's you might not have heard of, but there used to be loads and loads of productions there. When I talked to some people at Chorlton Good Neighbours about that, one remembered going there when she was a girl, and they had pantomimes on at Christmas, including one where it had Bo Peep and her sheep, and they had live sheep, that very, very sort of tatty looking ones, and after a while everybody in the audience began to start itching and scratching because of all the fleas that were there.
Did they use live animals then, didn't they?
And of course, this was before their time. Charlie Chaplin apparently appeared in a music hall act, according to this reminiscence of it. It was in the early 1900s. That would be though. The other things that there were an awful lot of course, were the shops. Lots and lots of corner shops. I mean, everybody probably remembers corner shops. Is where you get everything. I remember going to my granny's, and she'd always say, "Oh, run to the corner shop and get yourself a nice lolly," and things like that. They were very, very much part of your childhood, that you'd be sent for errands there to get something or other. Here's another one that's on its way out. But as you can see, and Dave, who the other week mentioned, well, a lot of these houses were very poorly built, and there is a lot of truth in that, but they weren't all badly built. And one of the problems is that they wouldn't go in for you know, getting rid of one block that was really bad and keeping another and doing it up. The builders just wanted the whole thing to be flattened to make it easier for them. And I think that had generally a very poor effect on them.
Mhm.
And here you can see this. I remember, I think I mentioned this before, when I went to university to do a sociology degree at Manchester, all this was happening at the time. And the lecturers, one of the lecturers there said, you'll notice that the only two things that are being left in Hulme are the two opium of the masses, churches and pubs.
Mm.
And there was a lot of truth in that. Those are the only two things that have survived. Not all of them, but quite a lot of them. There's another group of houses. These apparently were, I think, back-to-back houses, which are quite rare. There weren't many of those.
Bit like my house, yeah.
This is the Hulme
so
Lads Club.
Oh,
You can see there were some quite big buildings there as well. And this is something I'm, of course, was very interested in, which is the leaf spring baths.
That was my local swimming bath, yeah.
Did you ever go to it, Maureen?
Yeah, that's where I got my certificate, you know, when you do your length. And you
Right.
have to sort of wear pajamas or something and do a bit of life saving to get, and then it meant you could go anytime for free.
Oh,
if you
right.
did
right. Yeah, it was good,
Yeah,
isn't
so I
it?
was always at Leaf Street baths.
Yeah. Which is very, very traditional looking baths, isn't it? With
But
the
also attached to it was a laundrette, and all the ladies used to go with the prams, sort of the washing, because it had all the big boilers.
yeah,
and
I used to with my mum. Yeah.
yes. Well, I'm coming on to those, which of course the actual there was also a wash house as well
That's right.
attached to the baths,
Yeah, that's it.
and there was
Sorry.
also in Prime Street there were ones which were only where you could have a bath and a wash house. Now this is taken from an old book. It's actually a London book called Say Goodbye by John Atkin and Arnold Wesker, 1974, and their memories of what were called slipper baths.
Mm.
You know, and which is where you could go because most of the houses then didn't have inside toilets, didn't have baths, and so you go to a slipper bath to get your weekly bath or however long it was you went between baths. And the memories of them are really interesting. That I remember Doreen saying she'd go into one and you'd shout out, "More hot water in number 7," because you didn't have taps there. It was you know, because you'd waste it. They didn't have plugs either. They opened the plugs remotely to let the water out because you could just keep letting the water out and demand more, and they wouldn't have that. But these were places where you had conversations between the different cubicles, and generally speaking, they were, I think, something quite very interesting.
I don't think people like doing that.
No, I don't think they did either. This was Prime Street Wash House, photographed in 1914, with obviously some luminaries coming to have a look at it, and that's with what do they call those things again? Possets?
Proper.
Yes, yeah.
Which is
Dolly tubs.
dolly tubs. That's right,
Dolly tubs.
And
Yes,
again,
dolly tubs. That's right. I remember that.
one of the things to remember about all this period is there was no television. Doreen had no electricity in their house till she was age 6.
Did they have iPads?
iPads? No, of course they didn't have iPads. But she said what the difference was, the main centre was the fire, you know, the coal fire that you had. That the whole family gathered around that to keep warm. Well, keep warm at the front and then turn around to keep your back warm. But there was much more sociability going on, both in the streets and within the houses than you got later on. And of course, things like these wash houses were fantastic places for discussion and gossip.
Oh, I just gossip, all right.
Mm.
And this one was just nearby to that, which was the Proctor Gymnasium. Now, I actually didn't know they had gymnasia in those days. I thought they were a modern invention, but apparently they did. And
Didn't know.
I think the building is still there, but I'm not sure what it is now. And of course, there was also work there. The main work was in the breweries. There were several breweries in the area, but this is also the famous place where Mr. Rolls met Mr. Royce in a meeting at the in a meeting at the Midland Hotel. But they had their first workshop on Cook Street in Moss Side, and this is a picture taken of it in the 1930s.
Thank you, fine.
This is another picture of it taken from a different angle, not very good photograph. And this is the day that Rolls met Royce. And when it was reopened after its refurbishment, a 1907 Silver Ghost Rolls Royce was pushed into the entrance to commemorate it. This is a photograph from the rooftops showing just the broadness of the groupings there. The big buildings that were there, pubs, churches, baths. It was a vibrant area. That's what was being lost. It wasn't just the houses. And this is an indication of when you got the two bits side by side. I think that's St. Wilfrid's on the left, and you can see the new Hulme on the right with the deck access flats being built. I'm not going to go into all the deck access flats because I did quite a lot on that last week. This is Hulme 1 rather than Hulme version 2. And this was City Road School, which became an adult education college. You could see it from the motorway at the end of the motorway as the Mancunian Way, which became an adult ed. Then it became student flats, and now it's become done up into flats. It's still there as a building. This was originally City School. And then there's another street, Lloyd Street School.
You don't have to go.
Yeah, you go.
But I liked it.
Thank you.
I can begin.
And this is how it looked when it began to be cleared. And you can see it looks like it's just a scene of utter devastation. Everything has gone except the road markings and the occasional pub, and the background, I think it was a brewery and something else that's gone. But it was, you can imagine how Brenda felt when she came back. She'd been away in Germany, came back, came to have a look at where she'd lived, and this is what she saw. And I went through a lot of cuttings about all this just to see the background to it. And in 1928, Manchester was building 3,000 new working class houses in that year, and it went down. But they were all very clear on what they've called slum clearance, and what I just like to call clearances, because they weren't all slums. And at the time, they really got it, the bit between the teeth. They were wanting to pull down lots of small houses in Chorlton and Withington. You know those little houses in Chorlton off Beach Road? They wanted all those to come down. They are, of course, now bijou residences, which should cost you like to get. So somehow that was resisted, but in Hulme, it never was in that case. And this is the sort of reporting you got in 1959 about, I love the words that they've got. People were being fastidious about where they were being moved to. They weren't keeping them in Hulme. They were being sent out, by and large, to places a bit later on to Hulme. And then you can see at the bottom it talking about the vandal and thieves removing the lead and building materials, which is where the contractors were making their profits. So they wanted them out quickly. And that's when they moved to, rather than giving individual compensation, they just gave area. They just said that area was going to be cleared. Tough. These are the houses being ready to mark. You can see they just mark out an area, give everybody notice of it, declared a clearance area, and they went on to demolition. And that they had to have places to go to, obviously. This one states that the rateable value was usually about £10 to £12, and that's how much you got for an old house. It wasn't. I've heard later on it got to be more, quite a lot more than that, but this is what they're saying in 1963: £10 to £12 payments per house, which seems incredibly low. And one of the things about the clearances, the owner occupiers, especially in the Moss Side area, that were doing, a lot of were from Afro-Caribbean people who'd become very successful business people, And the way that they did that was using their houses as collateral for the businesses they started. Once they were all knocked down and they were put into flats as tenants, that had all gone. And with it went all those businesses from the 1940s and 1950s. And these are the aiming to get them going as quickly as possible, and that people they just wanted to move them on, but we haven't got time to go through them, but there's some very interesting things being said about it. This one was an interesting one, which is by a lecturer in economics at the time in 1966 as they were going ahead. The procedures laid down for considering compulsory purchase orders favoured the bulldozers. They always did that because it was in the interest of the contractors to have an area cleared. And that's what I think has left a lot of areas feeling these the new places that go on them had no continuity from the old, which is what I think really important in an area. And they didn't have it. A lot of other pairs have been like that too. This is how it looked like as it was being done up. Some of the older flats there being kept up. I still think they're there, of course. You can see, is that in the background? That looks like the toast track in Hulme in Fallowfield to me. Does it to you, Graham? Do you know that one? No, that could be the town hall, I think. Oh yes, there's the what's became the GMEX Centre.
That's the Central Station.
Central Station, yeah, they would have been there.
These flats are still there, aren't they?
They are, yes, yes.
On the roundabout.
Yeah, the older flats that were kept, and also the ones known as the red bricks, they were kept, and you can see from later on that they're much better than that. That's the kind of that I think is St Mary's Church, which had been turned into flats.
Yeah.
So, and there you can see it in the late 60s with some of the roads being put up. Somebody trying to put on what he thought the various things were. I'm hurrying up a bit because I realise we're running out of time here. Where is Hulme now after the Crescents? Well, this is a photo from promotion. You had the Crescents, which were also a story in themselves and haven't got time for now. But this is what the blurb for the latest new Hulme on the right says, and these are the red brick flats which are talked about, which I think are pretty good, and they're very popular, and they're thriving now. Don't worry, this is what they say in the blurb. It's exactly where it's always been. It's just a much better place. Gone are the really concrete blocks from a year ago. If you drive through now, you'll see a dramatic change. And let's be honest, it's one that's definitely from the better. Sales promo for a £23 million investment by One Manchester, a local housing provider. Though the remains of the old second Hulme are really found in the housing cooperative behind the Hulme Garden Centre, and the restaurant, was it Kim on the Beach? Is it Kim on the? Anyway, at the back of that, there's this area which is by residents, and it's and a cooperative of businesses as well. And you can see there they've got quite a lot of the vibrancy and creativity of the Crescents, they claim, and that's how it was a few years ago with the Hulme Garden Centre starting up, and in the background the old Near Centre, and behind that the old Hippodrome. So that's what it looked like when it was being pulled down. You could see it, Doreen's written on it, the Hulme Hippodrome on the back of that. And these are all the videos I've done. There's the Welcome Home Brenda is a separate one, and the various others, but I'll send once I've done this one, I'll send those all around, so if people want to have a proper look at them, they can. So that is the end of that. Gosh, I managed to fit it all in. Any comments, anybody?
Enjoyed it.
Brenda, any comments?
Me, Maureen?
Oh, sorry.
No, I was having, because the York Cinema I worked at in the evening as an usherette, and just the different buildings. I'm thinking, oh yes, I went there. So it's like a walk around my childhood. Thank you.
You're the one who had to learn how to walk backwards with the tray of...
That's how I learned how you do the W thing. Yeah, when you got your ice cream tray and you've got your torch and yes. You
go down one and then up front of the other and then down the other one.
You make a W, yes. So somebody's always waiting for you for your ice cream tray. But I mean, I worked in offices during the day. I did a lot on telephone work, but I liked filling my evenings.
Well, I think we're about to be cut off. So thanks everybody,
Thank you.
and I'll put the finished version up for you to look at if you're interested in it.
Thanks,
Okay.
Bernard. Great stuff. Yeah.
Bernard.